Hi, John.
Hi, Sarbjeet.
How's it going?
It's good. It's good. How are you doing there?
I'm doing great. Okay, folks, we are recording this episode off the cuff. John bought a new microphone and he put a post on LinkedIn. And that microphone actually looks much, much better. I think if he put a filter on that picture or something, and everybody can commented on it. Okay, I said, we have to put this microphone to test. Long story short, we are here talking about what John does best. And according to me, what he does best is he tries to create these frameworks in different ways to spur growth and innovation at the business he works with. And in general, he actually connects with a lot of experts in that area. And we met actually about 3 years back after I saw one of piece of his content he created, uh, marrying the design thinking um, with the innovation. Like how do we innovate? We can go into that a little later, but in brief, he focuses on the sort of growth and innovation strategies and putting how the making actually organizations more productive. John, tell us what exactly you do, and did I do the justice to
Yeah, no,
the introduction?
better than I'd give myself. So I work with another one of your pals, Bill Schmarzo, the dean
Yeah,
of big data,
but that's good, buddy.
and he's a good guy. Bill takes a chance on fellas with some crazy ideas. So I've done well out of that with him. So I work. Bill is the chief technology and innovation officer at Hitachi Vantara,
Yeah,
and I am his what he calls his design guy.
cool.
So that sort of roughly equates to Bill's got a big honking problem. He chucks it my way, and I got to scratch my head and figure out what we're looking at.
That's cool. That's cool. So you guys work internally and then like collaborate with external folks to build these frameworks and like tell me, like, let's talk about the design thinking, the first piece of content which I saw from you. How did that come about, and then you overlaid that in a different sort of framework, if you will. um, how do you guys go about it? Like we can go into other things like the organizational structures and how you enable people and all that stuff. But like, how did it start? How did you get into this whole thing?
Yeah. So actually, I think it's a good story. There's an interesting story. So I started off running executive briefing centers for EMC, and
Uh-huh.
I I was working in Ireland, and I came over here to EMC in the Valley in 2005, and I have a view of this story, Sarbjeet. One is sort of as it happened, and then two is as a retrospective.
Yeah.
So the first one was I landed over, and I had this great boss, a guy called Bob Basselier, and Bob said, he said, Johnny, he said, I'm going to give you 4 people, and he says, I want you to get 600 customers a year in there.
Yeah.
And,
Wow.
and that was a lot, a lot of customers and very few people. So the only way to go about it was to, sort of crowdsource our traffic and really get to know everybody in the company that met with customers. And at the time, EMC was growing rapidly by acquisition. So we actually acquired like 65 companies in something like 3 years. And one of the things I began to realize was the one place that maybe knew everybody in each part of the company was us in the briefing center. So we
Yeah.
started to try and create conditions for bringing these newly acquired teams together around a customer challenge. Um, where that kind of led, long story short, Sarbjeet, is as we began to introduce sales teams and customers to new parts of the portfolio, it became obvious that maybe we could spin up some prototype demos,
Yeah.
and that it went outside of the walls of EMC. We brought in VMware, we brought in Cisco, we brought in Microsoft, and that's one of the channels through which the whole converged infrastructure market came into being. In that we built a rack of server storage and networks, and ran VMware and Microsoft apps on top of it. And the team that built that went off to become the first engineering team at VCE.
VCE. Yeah.
So I didn't go because nobody knew what my role in that was. So I was kind of saying, we did something different there. What was that? And to wrap up this story, I remember a sort of a dark November evening at the Borders bookshop in University Ave in Palo Alto, and coming across Tim Brown's Change by Design book and realizing this is what we did. We actually designed this in a collaborative manner. And I met Bill because Bill was the data science guru. And I said to Bill, hey, we just did this. Do you want to do it around data science?
Yeah.
And we didn't build a business out of that, but we built the industry's first marketing data science lab out of it. So that's kind of how I happened into the whole design space.
That's interesting. Actually, we crossed paths, but I didn't know you back then. I was at EMC at that point, and I used to sit in the same building on the Great America Parkway.
Yeah.
And I used to go bring customers to customer briefing center on the second floor, right?
Yeah,
It
that's
was on
right.
the second floor. And I remember long meetings with Cisco execs and all that who will fly from Australia and, and other parts of the UK. And then we had
Yeah.
like a few big meetings with them. We were working on a big project with them for that's just an example. But anyways, yeah, it's a small world actually, in Silicon Valley. Actually, I always say that it's a small geographical area, and there's a pool of resources. They move around. They go from Oracle to VMC to VMware to Facebook to Apple. We move around, right? Like a like a group of bees or something like that. Or somebody flies away and comes back. Interesting stuff. So now, currently, actually, we talked a few times about some deep philosophy kind of ideas, how to enable people, right? Um, how to motivate people, um, how to collaborate with other vendors, right? Um, shed some light on that, the patterns you are seeing, um, what makes tech, how thinly we are spread in these companies. Like a lot of people are doing a lot of stuff, right? They're always busy. How do you take some of that a portion of their busy time, and to think about innovation or new ways of doing things, new ways of building, new ways of marketing, new ways of storytelling, new ways of sales, new ways of channels? Like how does that work in this busy world?
Yeah, I think I like that question. And you know what, if I go down a path here, I don't want to suggest that this is a right or wrong. I'm just going to say it's worked for me.
Yeah.
And also there are very well established innovation programs that have been very successful, and they do things in a certain way. And that's excellent. I probably go slightly more informally about things, and that's just my nature.
No, I like informal stuff actually, like going down to the basics actually, just not any heavy duty terms or words. No, just basics like the human nature, human psychology. How do we fight within ourselves? Like I have n number of hours. Where do I focus? Right. So just go raw, like basics.
So I'm, I mentioned earlier on, there was a kind of a retrospective view. So I'm going to give you the retrospective, because what used to be an irritation has become something that I've now sort of learned how to go after. So where I'm going with this, Sarbjeet, is that if you're inquisitive, you'll ask a lot of questions.
Mm-hmm.
And people are, I'd actually, honestly, I know we're in a crazy world at the moment. Most people are brilliant, and they'll actually help you, and they'll give you answers, and they'll point you to other people. And I found the more you inquire, the more information you have, so the more capable you are of improvising in a given situation.
Yeah.
And then the more success you have with your improvisation, or at least people don't tell you you're crazy, the more you kind of can lean into your gut instinct about things. And for me, the one thing that ties that all together is that it's learning to have a little creative confidence. And as an example, so where I sort of pull that from is a great lady called Natalie Nixon, who's written a book called The Creativity Leap, and I had a chance to get to know Natalie a little bit. And so she sort of answered for me what I felt was, how do you respond when you get an itch? Don't try and solve it. go out to the community and find out, is anybody else experiencing this itch or a version of it, or what is it, or have you seen that, what is this?
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
and that for me sort of, I only really figured that out in the last 12 months or so. But what it made me realize was that I think it starts for me and ends with people. And that we all have personal aspirations. And in a lot of cases, those things get shut down at work.
Yeah.
And so what I kind of purposely go after is, what was that aspiration that it is you had there, that thing that you were talking about? What is that? You know, who else can we talk to about that? And I just find that actually tends to surface some interesting ideas, which if you network enough people around, it actually becomes a thing.
Yeah.
You know, so that's a,
Yeah, I think what you're trying to say is that, correct me if I'm wrong, that when we talk to these people who are contributors, sometimes they're individual contributors, sometimes they can be leading groups. Like once we really understand what they really like doing, or what they really love doing, and if we can reframe our work structures or our work needs to their likings, they will go above and beyond and to do that job that way, or that piece of work, or that they will just go after it with their means or their way of doing things. Like, but you got to know them at deeper level. Is that what you're trying to say?
yeah, I think there's an interesting, like, there was something somebody once told me, and it really, it's actually worked. Is by and large, if you meet somebody for the, like, you know, it's how we met actually, Sarbjeet, because um, you know, you were kind enough to point out that you had seen this piece of content and you liked it and you were following up. And I thought, wow, that's fantastic. And then, you know, so I gush on about what I was doing and why. And then I think human nature just is, well, tell me about you, Sarbjeet.
Yeah.
And then I discover this whole world of stuff that you're doing, and like the relationship pivots, and that's okay, because so I think you buy into the other person's journey a bit first, and then they open the door. Unless they're like really an awful person, they'll open the door. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I always think it's a collaboration at the people level and the convergence at the technology level, which actually moves us forward, right? So yeah, it's incremental progress at all levels, right? People, processes, technology, right? Yeah, let's talk about the like the terms you use, neo
Generalist.
neo-journalists. Actually, yeah, I kind of lost that term. Neo-journalists, people who dig deep enough about different topics, and they can correlate or relate or they're cross-disciplinary learners. I can never say that word right. um, and then they kind of form a community of learners who are always learning.
Yeah, I do. I like that a lot. And actually, there's something. This is one of the reasons I reach out to you on so many things. Is I always kind of feel so. In your case, I just love the logic to your thinking. So I'll sort of, well, I'll throw this past Sarbjeet because he'll sort of tease this out logically, and I think there's an honesty in that too, which is if it doesn't make sense, and you know this because I've thanked you for this before. If it doesn't make sense or it could be better, you're usually pretty good at saying it doesn't make sense, and I think it might be better if you looked at it here from here. So I think there's trust built up, and I do feel that for me, I do look for this community of continuous learners, because that points to an adaptive perspective. No, when I say no fixed points of view, it means you're open to considering new inputs. And I do think if we look at the complexity that we have, either in technology or in society or you know, whatever you're looking at, the chances of any one person understanding the whole system is really null. So you've got to find people who you trust to inform you or lead you in the parts that you don't know. And I think that's really important at the moment.
Yeah, I usually refer to that as a vantage point. Like we all of us, we see a problem from different angles, right? A simple example is like when you talk about the performance, like it's a very generic word we use all the time. Like what's the system performance, right? So if you talk to a chief revenue officer, right? And they will say performance in numbers, like, oh, this is the margin, this is the performance of the system. If you talk to an engineer, they'll say it's 20% faster compute, right? Or something like that, right? And performance to marketers is like, okay, how they view the performances, like if their content is working in that context for that domain or that project or that program we are talking about, right? So we see problem from different angles. And I think the term we use, the neo-generalists, those people who know about economics and they're systems thinker, they know about the technology stack, and they also study sort of human behavior, the the organizational psychology. It's a whole discipline in itself. And they also take a look at the regulations and political sort of mood in the country and globally, like where we are going, all that kind of stuff. They can keep in mind all these variables to 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 say the something in that context. Like if somebody is like going to the one side, because they are very techy, or they're just focusing on revenue only, so those personas, right? They can bring them back a little bit. How about that? How about this? How about that? So yeah, I think they play a huge role. And from time to time I read about how important the humanities are, the arts. They need to match with the science, especially these days. We talk about that, right? The empathy is important at work, and the ethics and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I love what you're touching on there. I guess in the last year, I've spent a lot of time sort of looking at the things I explored in the previous couple of years and then trying to find a framework that defined them.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, what you're identifying particularly is something that you've heard me talk about, Shannon Lucas and Tracy Lovejoy. And they, I think, largely would classify this subset of people as catalysts. So yes, the neo-generalists being, you have a quite a depth of knowledge in a whole bunch of different things, but connecting those dots and seeing the systems, that's actually, it seems that that's quite on the rare side. And so one of the things I found, and you kicked this off for me actually, because you talked to me about pace layering, and the idea that in a system, not all elements or layers are moving at the same pace. Yeah. And I found that fascinating, because it suddenly unlocked for me that why do people have different language, or why do people not have the same expectation? And you followed that down the road for a year or two of making the same mistakes, and you realize, oh, it's okay for there to be multiple points of view in any project. The project itself has a point of view. And because things are so complex, no one person, to your point, can see the whole thing. But you do need some sort of orchestrators who can at least conceive that this is a big system.
Yeah.
And that therefore it's going to take some facilitation between the different players in there to actually to move it forward. And I don't mean that to sound too abstract, but the idea that you can walk into a project and say, this project is all about X, it's like, it's not. It's about all the different viewpoints in the room.
The ancillary disciplines, or I call it ancillary, the supporting systems, and or the other systems, but this system, what we're talking about, will support, whatever is in the context, right? So there's an ancillary nature to every system, right? I think systems is a beautiful thing. I usually talk to youngsters and my peers also sometimes, when I think they're not thinking about it that way. It's like, yeah, we gotta think in systems thinking, sort of constructs. A family is a system, your city is a system, state is a system, country is a system, the whole world is a system. So what it gives you is a framework to sort of divvy up the problem into different sort of buckets and relate it at the same time. We are talking about this system, but there are like factors inside, under our control, and there are factors outside our control. And let's see where we can focus. And at the end of the day, we are all trying to do things cheaper, better, faster, right, for the society. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. I think so for me, and I guess my sort of cognitive standpoint, design became a method for me to both explore the world the way I understood it, and then also begin to play a role the way I felt I could play a role. And you know, design is like walking in the room and saying you're a designer is like walking in a room and saying you're a consultant. So it's like, what kind of consulting do you do? And you know, and so within that, one of the areas of design that I think is very, very compelling is service design,
Mm.
because so much of what we do is around sharing our competence. Um, and that for me on a micro level is like we do each other a service because we're not selling each other a good, but we are sharing competence.
Yeah.
And where I wanted to go with that was like, as an example, today I was working with an engineering team around agile. And for this team, from their perspective, agile is the absolute gospel. Now, for the end project, which is about the experience a patient gets when they walk into a hospital during COVID-19, do they have COVID or do they have a broken toe? Agile doesn't matter to them.
Yeah.
And so, how would you actually orchestrate all those different viewpoints? And it's I just think it's fascinating to try and weave all those things together so that everybody sees value, and that patient walking into the hospital experiences the value that was created because all those experts came together at all those layers. And that is complex. um, and so you got to roll up your sleeves and listen to each other in those situations.
Yeah. It's interesting that how sometimes the big experts can be pigeonholed by their own blind spots and their own ideas, and they're imprisoned by it. Actually, they can't listen to anybody else. Or we have a perfect example, or leader of the nation is doing that these days. Like, I know it all, right? So yeah, we see it around us all the time. Um, yeah. So yeah, I had a thought. I lost it. It's what were you mentioning right when you started mentioning that part? Like, what was that? Like the in the beginning of what you just said. Like
uh,
in this segment.
on this segment, I think, well, where I was going, my mind was this concept of cognitive diversity, which
Yeah.
is that you had talked about vantage points, which I really liked actually, um,
Yeah.
and ancillary, and I was kind of leaning into that and sort of going, yeah, because we all do. There's actually if this is interesting, I can go into this. There's a tool called an AEM cube.
Mm-hmm.
And what it looks at is where do you sit on a range between, are you relationship driven, content driven, are you an explorer or an optimizer?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that plots your cognitive perspective on a project. So like I'm an explorer, so you don't want me doing project management or trying to get to you by a ship date or something like that. I'm terrible. I'll screw it all up.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you want me to kick down doors and see who's behind it and what they think, I'm your man there for that, you know? So it's like, how do we build these teams that not just have, and I don't even like to say expertise anymore, but they have competence,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
but they also have this cognitive perspective, like I'm going to finish this off or I'm going to explore.
Yeah, actually, yeah. On that note, actually, I still can't come back to my thought, which I lost. But in this context, I usually like from the personal exploring. Actually, I realized about like 6, 7 years back, who am I? Like, what kind of person I am? Actually, now I tell youngsters when I talk. At university level or the college level, whenever I get a chance, I talk to youngsters, is that we need to understand ourselves at a deeper level from early on. At high level, I think we are two type of people: creators and operators. Some people are like always, they want to create something new. They cannot operate something for a long time. They get bored of things easily. They want to hop onto the next idea. But some other people are, you can't call them like less creative or less important, or like, like, don't look at that way. But some people are like, they want stability. They like the smoothness of operation, so they're better fit for operations rather than creating stuff, creating systems, right? So the sooner you know your persona, the better you can fit in the world. You got to know your weaknesses and strengths, right?
That's pretty. I think that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
That's so
And
good.
another thing actually I found interesting and useful is that when you're analyzing companies like corporations, like most of the time, like people end up working with entities, right? um, you got to understand their demeanor or their personas, if you will, like what kind of company I'm getting into. uh, like different companies have different kind of personalities. At EMC, I was when I was at EMC, I know I mean, when I looked back actually, after I left VMware, then I started analyzing all my employers, and somebody told me like we got to take a look at these companies and through the different lenses. So I realized that EMC was like a sales-driven machine, right? And
Yeah.
VMware was engineering-driven machine, right? Engineering slash marketing. So engineering was very heavy group there. Like if you're part of MTS, you're the king or queen there. I always say that in most of my talks. So and at PeopleSoft we were very customer driven, right? Like uh, customers loved us. It was a slow as dog system, to be honest with you. Now I can say that because I'm not part of it anymore. So it was slow, but it worked, and we usability and all that stuff was very very important to us, right? um, at Oracle, it's mix of engineering driven and sales driven. I mean, you could like I'm analyzing my own employers. You can take any company and analyze it that way, like their persona, how you look at them, right? Like Apple is, I think, is a great marketing machine. Good products, but good engineering, but even better marketing, right? So analyzing this world around us or our potential employers, like because we have a limited number of years, we will do limited amount of work in this finite life, and we got to assess where I want to put my
Spend it.
brain to work, right? It's a challenge for many of us, right? It's a huge challenge. Once we join a company and say, oh, I could have joined that one, or I should have gone there, or I should have been independent, I should have been doing that, I should have been a painter, artist, not an engineer, stuff like that. We always fight within ourselves, even within a domain. When we join a domain which we love, we kind of fight.
I think that awareness actually saves you a whole bunch of frustration too,
Yeah.
because I spoke to somebody recently who was trying to get a role in Google and got utterly frustrated with their interviewing process. Um, and we've heard that story before, but my experience of people who've gone for roles in Google is that Google's pretty clear about what Google's going after. And if you go in and say, well, that's all very interesting, but I'm really good at this, well,
Yeah.
Google doesn't really care about that. So, and that's fair, And I think so. So I think to your point is if we're self-aware and we seek who to work with, including which companies, then it's up to us to find that fit. And then if you're in a place and it doesn't fit, you have to look at your own tolerance for that. I think at that point, say,
Yeah.
is there a sufficient upside here for me to stay here? Because the organization is going to do what the organization is going to do. And it took me a while to come around to that. I will say that I've worked for, and this is why I tie it back to continuous learning, is I worked for a lot of organizations that talked about the power of learning and made a lot of investments in education, but come to realize that I didn't actually know how to learn. And I think a lot of people are in that boat. So where I am now at Hitachi Vantara, one of the standout teams is the global learning team. They're awesome. And one of their first sort of missions is help people get better at what they do. And that starts with teaching people how to learn. I think that's so sort of simple, and yet it's effective, so, and part of that then drives awareness, so.
Yeah, that's interesting way to put it. How to learn, and how do we learn? Actually, some people learn visually, some people learn by doing it, some people learn faster by reading something, and people like me can't read a book from beginning to end. I can't. I have to just skim through it, and if I like a topic, I just read like 2 paragraphs and move on to page 5 pages later, and like just flipping pages quickly. That's what I do actually. And I was kind of ashamed of it for a long time. I never talked about it. Like it's my weakness, but now I hear more and more people say that. um, some of us are not great readers, but we are like, we can cherry pick the topics and connect those together. Some of us uh, do that, right? So I think that constant learning is important for organizations, for people, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And one of the things that I sort of loop this back in the spirit of wandering around the conversation is one of the things that we're exploring at the moment inside Hitachi is that if you identify sort of people who are good dot connectors and sort of see systems, um, I this is a generalization and it's a hypothesis. It may not be accurate. Tend to sort of see that they're also quite good self-directed learners.
Yeah.
And so the next part of that is if you have an aspiration or you're curious and you're on this journey, do you know how to go and prototype that for yourself?
Yeah.
And again, a lot of people maybe don't. So that's one of the things we're working on is what's your idea? You're not too sure. Great. Let's bring you into a safe space where you can explore that with some other people and maybe prototype it and see what that gets you. And that's fun because that gets you around. I think actually if you thought about creators and operators, if you stand back from that for a moment, and when we've had some success with this at Hitachi, is you get that old mantra of doing more with less. But then if you look at what degree of somebody's capabilities actually put to use in their job, it's not their full capability. So if you can actually access some more of that capacity, you get
Yeah.
more done. And so we've had some projects come home that we didn't actually have to get any extra resource on. We just allowed people to go and explore them. So I think that gets interesting too.
Yeah, actually, that what you just said creates a parallel for me to think through. Like, why did we virtualize servers? So we can get most out of it, right? So from physical servers to VMware, we virtualize it, right? We are condensing the
Yeah.
workloads, right? Like it's like we can pack more, right? So for humans, like that's what you're trying to do when you said that. Like we're trying to use our brain power and our physical abilities to do some work at every level. It can be intellectual work, knowledge work, it can be even normal jobs, right? So and some part of us is always like not liking that role. Like some people are like 50% satisfied with the jobs. Some people are like 80%, 90%, but there's always some part which is like, I don't like that thing, but you like something else. So I think by having these cross team collaborations to do things, like you get to do what you want to do in the other context with the other team, and that 10 or 20% what you don't like about your job, like a messy part or something, somebody else might be very excited about that. Is that where you were going with
Yeah.
that? Like,
Actually,
well,
you got yes, and you've taken me down a track I hadn't really thought of. So come at me on this for a second and see how this resonates. So I would look back based on what you just said and say that I was incredibly fortunate. It was EMC. It could have been another player in the space, but I was incredibly fortunate to be in the corporate infrastructure business between the late 90s and sort of the mid 2000 teens, let's say. And I still am, obviously. And the reason for that is we grew from storage to storage and servers to storage and servers and networks to storage and servers and networks and apps, and then up to the user. And
yeah,
then you suddenly found yourself a couple of years on sort of going, okay, well, listen, here's the user who comes on, logs into some sort of device to get access to information, or it might be one machine talking to another. There's regulations and things around those we need to pay attention to. It connects into a network. In the old days, it would then connect into servers and into the storage area network. Now it's into the cloud. And to your point about load balancing, and then we had the concepts of like, service levels coming in and how would you orchestrate that and how would you protect it. Where I'm going with all of this, Sarbjeet, is that I sort of had a 15-year schooling in how to build an incredibly complex machine and who were all the individuals that would come in at every level and how would they collaborate and sort of what were the different behaviors at that level. And so as you tell that story, I'm realizing I had this incredible education in what happens when you build something complex. not just the functions of it, but actually the personalities and the behaviors and the journeys. And I think that is, that's what I've always found fascinating about IT. I mean, now we're into, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and I do always think these steps are just, they're all iterative.
Yeah.
Now we have enough horsepower that we can actually predict, prescribe, and make things autonomous. And that's okay, because that's part of the journey. And we've been on this journey for decades. I don't know if that's what you've triggered in me there.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah, yeah. Actually, um, folks, if you're listening or watching, this is what we do. When we sit together, we can talk for hours, and we just mull over ideas, and the new ideas come into our brains, and it's like, how about this? Are we trying to virtualize the human brains? That's where I was going with that. Like we're trying to get more out of us um, in a short amount of time by collaborating with others. So we can use our extra capacity somewhere else in a meaningful way, and they can use their extra capacity with us in a meaningful way, right? That's where I was going with that. The founder of LinkedIn, I'm bad with the names, remembering names. He wrote a book about the new ways of employment, right? And it was actually the main gist of the gist behind the book was like we should be working as like we're on a tour of duty, like a military. Like I call that like a talent as a service. Like we have everything as a service these days. We're doing that. A car as a service, the like auto as a service, the mobility as a service. We have software as a service in our world, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service, and everything is we want to pay by drip, right? And we have the gig economy going, right? Not only in the more normal jobs like food delivery and the auto, like all these Ubers of the world um, and and all these people who deliver the food at home and stuff like that. But I think even the knowledge workers will be on tap for you. That you can get knowledge worker for 2 hours and pay them a little higher premium, but like you don't have to, you're not stuck with them for months or years, right? So I think we will get there at some point, but we're not there yet. But people like us, especially like me, they're trying to do that. Actually, I'm independent for last 4 years or so, three and a half years, I'll say, and it's it's maturing sort of discipline. I think there's a heavy lifting up front, but once you establish yourself with other people in the industry, um, where you I think we were talking before we started. Like I can hop on a plane. Was I talking to you or Joanne before this? Like I can hop on a plane uh, and if I know that some expert is coming to some conference, I will come there, meet with you, and have dinner with you, lunch with you. So I do not hesitate to make that investment. I know it's money. For many people, it's not even possible. I know some youngsters, they don't have enough money to do that, but whenever you get a chance to, what I'm trying to say is that whenever you get a chance to be closer to the people who you want to be like or you respect in that domain or discipline, try to meet them in person if you can, or try to connect with them um, at whatever level you can, whenever you can. So having mentors and advocates is a huge part of our personal growth, I think.
I think if I could, and I'll ask you a question now, because and I'm curious how this sits with you. So I'm very familiar with and aware with your again, eschewing that word expertise. I'm going to say your competence in all areas, cloud and technology. But for me, I think you're a super connector, and you have this ability. We talked about neo-generalists. You have this ability to go and not just show up and be relevant in the conversation, but actually pull others into that conversation. Now, so I'm curious if I'm curious how you get to continuously to I guess transact on that value. Because I think that's something I really find it's funny when we build networks of collaborative conversations. So I was just curious on your take on that whole that sort of frame.
Yeah, to be honest with you, it's painful. And painful in a way that I spent a lot of time on it. Like it takes a lot of investment, time investment, which is time is money in these economies, these nations. Like if I was in India, I belong to a farming family, so the house was free, and we have we have the fields where we grow our own vegetables and everything. It's self-sustained kind of like a village kind of economy. I came from there, but here we have to earn money and all that stuff to pay the mortgages and all that stuff. But and especially if you're living in the Bay Area, right? So so it's a sacrifice, to be honest with you. But I think it's a calculated risk kind of thing, right? And it's a constant. Yeah. It's basically it's a sacrifice to do the meaningful work in the long term. You can get more money. You can earn more money in the short term, right? I always talk about short termism versus like long term thinking, and oh gosh, today is not my day. I'm blanking on his name. This dude wrote a book about um, long-term infinite games and finite games, right?
Simon Sinek.
Simon Sinek, yeah, Simon Sinek,
Yeah.
yeah. So guys, excuse me for my forgetfulness. Yeah, Simon Sinek talks about that, like finite games and infinite games. So I'm trying to play the infinite game, to be honest with you. So that makes me connect with these people, and ideas are more important than people. Intellect is more important than money. These are my frame in my brain, like having a greater good is more important than just thinking about my family or my state or my country only kind of thing. So it's like just thinking at a higher level and trying to make things systems better. And I mean, systems better is the best term, I think, not the country better or the world better. So any system you're thinking about making it better, right? So keeping in mind that at the end of the day, there are people using those systems, right? So it's like having the empathy in yourself, like how I can make the life of blah, whatever you fill that in there, easier. So I remember at VMware, our mantra used to be, the company's mantra used to be, we want to make the life of sysadmin easier. For about 6-7 years, we had that mantra, and we used to have these I love VMware stickers, and people loved it. People
Yeah, I
loved
remember that.
us. I used to go to customers, and they used to say, "Do you have stickers? I love VMware." They will put that on their laptops because it made their life easier. Seriously, it did. They didn't have to go into the data center to manage the systems. They could do that from their home, over the wire, and it's all virtual, and you can drag drop machines here and there. They didn't have to put the machines on the cart and drag it, right? Seriously, and run the wires. You can do virtual networking and so forth. So I think it's having that empathy toward people in the domain you're working with. If you're in medical domain, if you're a doctor, and you're constantly thinking about how do I make the life of other doctors easy, and then you come up with something creative. I think that's what keeps me talking to people and picking their brain from different angles. My goal is to gather the most number of vantage points about a topic. That's why I do what I do on Twitter, mainly on
Yeah.
Twitter. And people have, not only you, people have told me that I create a lot of discussion threads which live for months, sometimes over like years, and people pick up from last year and talk about that further. I think it's that a constant thinking about systems to improve those, and looking at the different vantage points. I usually say that a system, like the smartest system, is the one which can take into account the most number of variables while making decision, actually making any decision. So like most number of factors you can take into account while making a decision, you will make a smart decision. Like you will not leave certain aspects of the system out, right? And that came to my mind, that sort of verbiage came to my mind from, because I'm a coder at heart. I used to write a lot of code, I still do. So when you write a function, there are parameters of the function, right? People who are techie who are listening, they know that, right? So when you write a function, there are parameters you pass to the function, and there's also a return value. It can be object or, you know, single type or something like that, right? So sorry, got a little too technical there, but that once you get all those parameters into a function, what you do that in that function with those parameters, that matters, right?
Yeah.
You could have used them on a different weightage points, right? So like you have, like, let's say you have 10 parameters to make it, or 10 factors to make a decision. And then there's a different weightage for each of them, those 10. You got to not only know the factors, but also the weightage. And what different vantage points give us when we are discussing topics, they let us assign the different weightage to different factors. Gathering factors is easy, but assigning the right weightage is hard.
Mm-hmm.
I will stop there. I can talk.
So I like this example because you triggered two for me, and this is one of the reasons why I found design to be such a powerful method to sort of have in your back pocket. And you know, you can go way deep on design, but there's a whole range of like free skills and tool sets available online where you can learn enough to be useful. So one of the things that I like there is I like to talk about logical models, you know,
Yeah.
input, output, what activities are going to drive it forward. And I found at the start, when you get in a room with a lot of data scientists in particular, and they talk about all the different languages and all the different, you know, parts of the model. And at the start, I was kind of going, oh, I don't really understand this. I just want to talk about a logical model. And then earlier on, I was talking about sort of inquiry, improvise, and sort of intuit. So I went over one day going on to Google during a meeting, and I just put in machine learning logical model. Boom, up it popped. And suddenly there were all these words that these guys were all talking about. And theirs was in a circle, not a rectangle like mine. But when I looked at it, it was the same. It was input, output, activities in the middle. And so I went off and I created two slides. One was for the non-machine learning audience and one was for the machine learning audience. And then what I did was I created a third slide, which showed that they were the same thing, different language.
Yeah.
Same model. Now, what's our relationship? Which one's going to trigger the other in terms of our priority? And so I kind of found with that is that you mentioned earlier on about finding common language, and that like when you talk about parameters there, and I could be wrong on this, but I would say that's great because what you've laid out there are the constraints. We have to operate within these guardrails.
Yeah.
And if you then lean into a particular type of technology that drives that, well, I won't understand that technology, but I'll understand its function. And that's all I need to know. And so I found what you, and one other, if I'm going to make a little bit of a leap here, Sarbjeet, mm-hmm. is that one of the methods that I came across in the last year that for me was kind of a sort of a profoundly pivotal was something that's called strategic doing. And like it's the idea that, because I tagged you and we were talking about it. It's the idea that don't start with the problem. Start with the shared aspiration. And what that does is it actually forces people to climb out from behind their point of view and say, I can bring these assets and this insight to this challenge. And one of my favorite examples of their method is, in a civic setting, they went to the city of Flint, Michigan, where the challenge they were set was, how do we reduce teen homicide? Yeah. And the reframing of the question they put was, what if Flint, Michigan was the safest city in the country to raise a teenager in? What would that look like? And Jesus, everybody came out from behind their wall, and suddenly they were cooperating in ways they'd never cooperated before because somebody changed the frame.
Yeah.
And so I think these things are profoundly powerful.
I think language is very powerful instrument, right? We can reframe a problem with a different language, different sort of frame, if you will. So we usually call it a frame, but I call it language. And it can get same people very excited who were just against it a few minutes back because it was said in a different way, right? That's what you're referring to, right? So I always say this. I'm a linguistic kind of junkie, right? I say I flirt with words, and sometimes they respond. So seriously, they do actually sometimes respond in a meaningful way. Like you can come up with these catchy phrases or sayings or something like that, which will. The idea is not to look smart, but the idea is to codify complex topics into simplest terms, or put that into simplest terms, right? Or some people can understand it. Like we can write a book about like how one piece of technology breaks other, blah blah blah, like, or saying something like technology, like medicine, every pill has a side effect, right? So then you say, oh yeah, people can relate to medicine, and so if I take this pill it has side effects, so I have to take another pill. So you gotta make sure that you don't take the pill without thinking, right? Same way, you don't just bring in some new technology without thinking through it, like what will it do, right? So like I think having those um, different frames, like you said strategic thinking, right? That is a term which makes you think about long term,
Mhm.
right?
You know, it's interesting you go there. Like and you talked to loop this back to where you're talking earlier on about self-awareness. Like, and I've done this with you a bunch of times. And the other person I'm going to call out here is Mr. Schmarzo. Like, if I have a complex idea, I'll actually go to Bill because he'll say it much better. Um, and
Yes.
if I'm going to write something, I'll often come to you because you'll say to me, well, "Who's this for?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
what's the purpose here?" And so it's that sense that it's okay if you have an idea. It's okay to come with that idea to the table and go, look, I think this thing is pretty well formed, but I won't be able to communicate it. Can you have a look at this
yeah,
and cast your eye over it? So you're bringing your skills in. And I used to, I don't have it at the moment. It's kind of a joke. I read a book myself earlier this year called Letting Go, and I read it for myself because I had to
yeah.
learn. And actually, it was a lady who's tagged you with, so we'll get into a conversation with her soon, Fran Willis White. And Fran said to me one day, she said, you know, method follows intent.
Yeah.
And that's really simple, but it was
That's powerful.
like utterly profound. So I suddenly realized, oh, I can let this stuff go.
Yeah.
Actually, I know I'm driven by intent, and I was trading on method, and I realized there's all sorts of people that are better than me in all these methods, and that was causing me anxiety. So as soon as you let that go, it's just, it is quite powerful, you know? So I think that ties back into also, Sarbjeet, this sense of networked exploration and collaboration and nudging each other forward. And suddenly, you know, somebody in that network gets a win and we all celebrate it and we keep moving forward. Because does that make some, I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, it makes sense, perfect sense to me, actually. Um, we as a country are very divided right now, right? So, like, I always say that, many times I say that, like, people who hate certain politicians, we know who that is right now these days. Um, and I say that person's intent is at the right place, but the method is not. But what I'm trying to say is, like, sometimes your method also freaking backfires on your intent,
mm-hmm.
right? So you can have a very pure intent, but if your methods are in conflict with that intent, it can drag you down, right? Or like they can take you to like these unknown places. So I like where you're going with that intent and method. I think it lets you put your ego aside a little bit, right? So like, okay, I was right. No, no, no. Our intent is to do this, and math, we can pick any method, whatever is best method. Actually, it fosters more like better teamwork.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one that unlocked that for me was Roger Martin wrote a book called Creating Great Choices. And inside Creating Great Choices, he talks about don't look for the worst or the least worst compromise.
Yeah,
Look
least
for the
worst.
best shared aspiration. And I thought that was powerful as well. So where I was going with this is that when you have this kind of, I think if you can figure out, and you said that earlier, like really nice, if you can get that self-awareness and you say to yourself, listen, I'm good on intent, methods I'm decent, but I'm maybe not an expert and that's okay. That actually reduces your stress and anxiety. And what that means is you don't feel you're giving something up. You haven't had to compromise. You can now
Exactly.
move
Yeah.
forward on the things you are strong at. And I will say to you, come back to me in a year's time, but certainly that for me has been a real eye opener in the last 12 months. Is it allows you to go with the flow, and actually, because you talked about it, I wish we had more of that in the public discourse as well, because everything at the moment is a challenge, and it doesn't need to be a challenge.
Yeah, I think communication is the key. Without, like, I just recently tweeted, actually, I create those picture things,
Yeah.
saying things. I did that for that. I thought it needed to be highlighted. Then without dialogue, we will cripple as a society, right? Without dialogue, if we can't talk to each other, we are not a society. We are not a country. Then together, we can't stay together if we don't talk to each other. It's hard as a company, as a family, as a country, against systems, right? Smaller systems, bigger systems, right? So as a country, we're fighting like crazy left and right, and and we are falling into the hands of our adversaries. I don't subscribe to conspiracy theories and all that, but I'm not naive enough to know that there are some adversaries, other countries who want to bring us down or who want us to do a little worse than them, kind of stuff, right? And they want to have an edge in the world and blah blah blah. I think we're falling into their hands when we talk bad about the other side, like without any rational, well, without any good substance or good argument, and not understanding their point of view, what they're going through. And sometimes, like, I'm in the middle always, like in the political spectrum. I don't belong to any party that way. But when sometimes people label me like, "Oh, you sound like right wing," or you sound like left wing, and it's like, man, I'm just trying to dissect the problem, right? So there are way few less of us, I think, people who can just take a look at both sides and see, guys, we need to think about the solving the problem, not like it's left or right. Think of a problem as a problem for our society to solve. Like, why are you so polarized? I mean, actually, we can never win these political
It,
wars or discussions, but it's part of us being human, I guess. But I kind of I I don't like the way we are approaching bigger societal issues these days.
I think one of the challenges we have, and I agree with you, I think one of the challenges we have at the moment is an inability to define what the problem actually is. And then we gather in camps where, yes, you have a defensive wall around you, but really I think it's a sign of weakness. And that what we seem to have sort of given up on at the moment is resilience, and that there's something worth actually, I'll put it to you this way. There's a sense now that if you challenge somebody, that it's bad.
Yeah.
And I actually think it's the opposite. If somebody has the wherewithal to come and challenge you, then they've done you a favor. And like, there are strong differences in opinion between different constituencies, and that's okay. But if you stood for a moment and looked at where is the shared purpose between everybody inside the four boundaries of the country, we have a heck of a lot more purpose in common, So I think it's just a matter of stepping back, but also standing up and pointing these things out.
Yeah, time is another dimension actually, which we can sort of tack on to issues and see it through a different angle, from a time angle. Like things, I always say the bigger systems like take care of themselves like better than smaller systems. They don't, bigger systems don't usually fall apart quickly. It takes a long time, and in the meantime they kind of they adjust, right? So bigger democracy. There's another like, I will go on a rant right now, guys. It's like people start comparing our education system in US with other countries which have like population of 10 million or something. That's like bullshit, right? Like their problems are different, right? A smaller population, a smaller system can operate on a different set of assumptions, different way than a bigger system. Like, I'm not saying that we should not pick the good components from other countries and all that stuff, but we got to understand the magnitude of the problem we are having, or the disparity um, um, between haves and not haves, and our political structure and our economic structure, which is pure capitalism, versus some of them are like socialist countries, or semi-socialist, so they're hybrid, right? It just, people don't understand the complexities of any system, and they just start comparing the systems at one variable level without knowing 10 others or 20 others or 100 others, right? So it's mind-boggling to, like, tell them or correct them. I was like, guys, you can't do that. Don't go there, right? So it seemed within the companies or at individual levels, we can't just compare us to Johnny Depp or something. Like, oh, I can't act like them. Dude is acting for those that long, and he has that many connections. He lives in LA. So many factors, right? The point I'm trying to make is that there are different aspects of things that we don't take into account when we have confrontation. I think it just usually comes from not having the other context in mind from other person's point of view. Somebody recently said that this to me. Actually, I heard that on TV or somewhere, like on a YouTube video or somewhere. Somebody told me that some people, like in this political context right now, I'm going into that context to make a point, that some people are like, some voters are one issue voters.
Yeah.
Only one thing matters to them, and then if that thing is there, they will vote to that candidate, right? And same is true at the companies. Some people are very, very firm about one thing, and if they hear that anybody favoring that their thinking, they will go above and beyond to please that person, work like over above and beyond. They will listen to that person, if you will, right? So I think that as a society we have to keep in mind, like, like we gotta we yeah it what I'm going with that is, like, we can't cater everybody, right? On the flip side of things, like, we want everybody to do great, but at the same time we can't cater everybody. Look at all those people who are like one issue voters or one issue employees. It's hard for us to please them at workplace, and it's hard to please them sometimes, right? Like, to, like, okay, like, you, as you said, like, you go to Google, you know what Google is best at, and then you try to fight that, it's gonna be hard.
Yeah.
Right.
I think I think one of the things that's interesting, you talked about big systems sort of failing slowly.
Or
I think
being self-correcting at the same time.
no, absolutely. I think one of the things that we've seem to have lost sight a little bit at the moment is the fact that if you want to extract value, you actually have to invest in the creation of value.
Yeah.
And I think the latest flavor, not the latest, but sort of recent flavors of that in companies have been, lean startups and prototyping and innovation hubs and all that. And this concept of exploring and exploiting in tandem and sort of bridging those two. And I think we shouldn't lose sight of doing that, not just on the corporate and economic side of it, but actually on the social side of it, because that's the same value chain. And if you suddenly take one piece of that away, this will eventually falter also. And that's, listen, I know people will say that that's socialist. But to your point, I don't really care on that point of view. I mean, I think given an opportunity, most people would actually be accountable for themselves and take responsibility for themselves. And I think both inside our companies and sort of socially in general, you got to invest to reap a return. And if you reduce the investments, the returns will eventually diminish also. So that might be provocative thinking, but it just seems to be all part of the system in my mind,
No, I think that's so true. It's again short-termism, like you want quick buck, or you want to win at any cost, right? And for monetary gains or for political gains, or like having power or money. They go hand in hand, actually, by the way, in this society, in this world these days. You can buy power with money. You can win elections if you give enough money to Facebook during those 3 months. Seriously, you can. You can buy votes. It's very strong statement I'm making. Yeah, you can buy thinking. You can buy thinking these days. You can divert attention of a nation to certain topics and not let other topics come up, which are more important to the masses, right? Like Facebook is a good example of that, right? So making quick buck right now and sort of messing up our social fabrics and stuff like that. And there's a documentary on Netflix, a Social Dilemma, actually. I don't know if you have watched it or not.
Not yet. I've seen your tweets on it, and it's on the queue.
It's like we knew that, like as techies, we know that, like how much you can be tracked, and but certain things, the way they tell the story is like we can be programmed. My brain can be programmed by somebody else, but because they're throwing stuff at me a certain way, right? So we like we talk about ML, machine learning. We are training models, right? We're training machines based on data, and these networks are training us, right, with that data. We are computers, actually. At the end of the day, this computes. It computes all these variables, and we're very complex computers. But still, it can be hugely impacted how it thinks, how it processes things based upon what you throw at it.
I think one of the things, and I'll loop this back to something that again I learned from you early on, and it's this concept of pace layering.
Yeah.
I get very interested in this because there's a few things in there. One is that you talk about, if we can just go back 2 minutes and talk about companies, and you can, as the terminology goes today, you can explore and exploit at the same time.
Yeah.
You can invest and reap the reward at the same time. I think what's really important, and I think part of the problem systematically we have at the moment is, again, Ed Morrison, who's the founder of Strategic Doing, he talks about the S-curves, and what happens at the end of an S-curve is we've optimized something to the nth degree, so we're kind of done with it.
Yeah.
And so the next S-curve begins. And ideally what you'll do is you'll start the next S-curve with people who are explorers and discoverers, but we don't. We actually leave the people who optimize this one to start this one. And it's a mess because that's not where their skill set is. And so what we've got at the moment is this kind of situation where our democratic institutions and our ways of doing business have lagged behind the technology.
Exactly. Yeah.
And things that we probably should be valuing, we're not yet valuing because they're stuck on this first S and they haven't made the transition. Now that's my bias, because I would say to you, it's a really good time for people like us, Sarbjeet, who like to explore and connect people. But frankly, it's also a very difficult space to earn a living in. And yet there's no shortage of people showing up to have a conversation about these things, because people understand that we don't have a shortage of assets. The models just don't fit the challenge right now. And I think that is honestly at the root of most of what's going on. And then you've got a few actors in there who figured it out and they're exploiting it. And I do believe that quite strongly. I'm waiting for something to arrive from the UK for over a month. I know that it landed in New York 3 weeks ago. It might arrive November 4th. Who knows? That's all right. That's the game, right? So, but it shouldn't, ideally it shouldn't be like that. So it's an interesting time. I think we are in this transition. And then I kind of look back and, if you remember, if you look at COVID, the Spanish flu preceded the Roaring '20s. So I do sort of have a kind of a glass half full view of this, which is we are discovering so much right now about human nature and challenges and how we deal with it and what we don't want on every spectrum, that I'd like to think that maybe steers around to us creating the next wave of something good.
Yeah, I think it comes back to that bigger systems take care of themselves kind of thinking I have, is that universe, which is like this, it's not a universe, it's just our Earth, blue ball, a few people, 7 billion on it, right? It's like we'll take care of it. Things will settle down. I'm very hopeful about it, actually, and we have done it in the past, right? We have gone past some weird stuff in the past, and we'll go through it, and and I think technology throws us out a little bit. The connectivity through internet and everybody having a a microphone and loudspeaker kind of thing. It just puts us into this weird kind of situation. But for long term, it's good, I think. Um, Gary Vee, I don't know if you know Gary Vee. He's very outspoken, um, influencer kind of guy. Very good, he's a good investor. He made a lot of money from Twitter and all those investments. And he talks about marketing all the time. Very like he just says whatever he thinks. Like I love him for that. And he says like social media hasn't changed us, but it has exposed us, right? Like what we were inside, right? So because it lets us speak our mind, right? It didn't change us. It just lets you say it, globally, right? And I think that's a good thing. On the political spectrum, I think having these right wing leaders, nationalists coming to the forefront is also a blessing in disguise in a way that I believe that has diffused the situation, which could have led to civil wars in different countries. I believe um, because it brought the issues to the forefront, even though they are very radical and pain in the rear to deal with these people, and they're saying bad stuff and they're dividing us. But if they didn't come to forefront, the way things were going were pretty bad. Like the disparity of income and corporations not giving a damn about any country or a set of population, they exploiting the situations anywhere they could, not paying taxes in the countries they operate in, going to cheaper labor in other country, and not getting with the middle class in this country, or vice versa, right? It just pisses off people. It does, and it leaves a lot of people behind. I've seen the Rust Belt. I've traveled most of the U.S. while working, and it's pathetic out there. Um, and talking about when you said S curve, right? That it took me to that world where we leave a lot of people behind when we hop on to the next level in from agriculture economy to industrial to knowledge and further, right? So we leave so many people behind. We don't care about them. It's not being socialist, as you said. It's being more like being pragmatic or not knowing the reality. There's some people out there, and they have power, and they will raise their voice, and it can cause instability anywhere in any system. I don't know where I'm going with that, but again, system thinking.
Yeah.
You gotta make sure every part of the system, or you say every part of the system is functioning to its best abilities. Some part of the system can break, or you can replace the part, or you can fix it, but you don't want some big parts of the systems fail, because then the whole system fails.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Absolutely. It's
Is it time to wrap up? Actually, it's almost like 90 minutes, and we were supposed to talk for 30, I guess.
No, it's all good. Well, you'll do your editing magic.
No, actually, I love it so much that I'm going to put it as is. The one thing actually I was thinking about starting a podcast in long form like this was that I seriously don't care if somebody listens to it or not. Seriously don't. It's for us to refine the ideas and 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 maybe pass it on to the people who have patience to listen to
Yeah.
this kind of stuff, and even if 4 people listen to it, it's worth it.
You
Yeah.
you you hit on something actually there, and I don't know if this exists, but imagine if you had, and maybe it does exist, if you had some sort of a language processing tool
Yeah.
that can actually listen and extract the themes and just map the flow. You get a very interesting sort of a neural flow, of how. And there's a there's a concept I've come across recently that I really like, and it's called breadcrumbing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's breadcrumbing into a scenario. It's not following a strategy or process. It's just following the conversation in.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I really like that as a method for getting stuff done.
No, there are quite a few open source libraries which do sentiment analysis on a piece of
Audio.
speech, audio.
Yeah.
Because from audio they turn that into text, and from text they can see if it's a positive. People are talking about social issues. People are talking about systems. They can get that just out into a small summary, or they can create keywords for you from the discussion. What I usually do is whenever we were doing this bi-weekly kind of recordings with some techies, I was doing that. So I will take that and then create a timeline because we want, it's not that we don't care about other people. We do a lot, like the audience and people who will listen to it. That I was creating a timeline of, like, we talked about following topics at 5 minutes and 20 seconds we talked about this, and 10 minutes and 20 seconds we talked about
That's
this,
cool.
so people can jump to those sections and uh, get some stuff out. Another way to, I think, leverage the content, like this kind of long form content, is like we can take like snippets into, like, we know that LinkedIn lets us put, I think, 9 minutes or 10 minutes long video. It's about that. And Twitter is 2 minutes and 20 seconds, something like that. So create, like, just take like some key sort of phrases, or no, not phrases, key sayings or summaries from this talk, for example, and tweet
Yeah.
or put that on LinkedIn, and put the full discussion link there if somebody wants to listen to it. But that should not stop us from having this free form thinking discussion, that we should not be keeping. We should not. There shouldn't be a ticker going on. Oh, we have to put it on that form. Oh, it's too long, right? So then we can't have a good discussion, I think.
Yeah, that reminds me. I spent most of my day today doing just research interviews for a project,
Yeah.
and then it was interesting because depending on who I spoke to today, first of all, they answered my questions completely differently in their styles. I have to
Yeah.
print it all back. But one of the things that emerges is, because you have different viewpoints, very quickly, I have 21 people to interview. I interviewed 5 of them. Very quickly, I can tell you what the problem is that we're trying to solve.
Yeah.
And what I love about that is I do need to go through all 21 so that I can actually validate it, 5 times over. But it's a little bit like that thought, is that these themes will continuously surface. And now it's just a matter of, I've identified it. Now it's just actually getting the validation,
Right.
And I think, so where I was going with that, from where you were talking about identifying the points, is that the free flowing conversation is really an exploration, but it's how many times do we loop back to 3 or 4 core things?
Core points.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting to look at.
Yeah, I think that's the key to really get to the meat or the cream. We have to shake the whole pot, if you will. Like, we have to, ideas have we put into some big, if it's a visual thing, into some big pot, and you just shake it, and so we get the cream out on top. So, and what I usually call narrative building, like build narratives, right? So I try to
Yeah.
do that. It takes a long time, many discussions, many times, to build a good narrative. And you have been doing that in your work, actually. Yeah, I kind of admire your work, the way you're approaching it. It's it's not quick and dirty kind of stuff. Like, it takes a lot of effort to convince other people to do things differently, or
Well,
see things differently.
you had a big role in that. I hope you kind of take, it's one of the things, I hope you take a little moment to celebrate how many people you pushed
I,
down the road, because
I,
you were the one who encouraged me well, you were the first one who said to me, your stuff is out there. Are you aware of that? I wasn't. And then you sort of encouraged me to find a voice and understand who the customer was and sort of how to frame that. And then, so thank you. But within that, somebody told me something just today, and it's somebody else I've tagged you with, but we'll get there. Is a guy called Paddy O'Reilly in the university in Cork. Paddy said to me in a conversation, because we're working on something together, and he said to me, I get this sense you're trying to land something.
yeah.
And I was a bit taken aback by that, because I was like, I'm not trying to sell anything here. And he goes, no. He said, go away and think about that. And I said to him, well, while I'm thinking about it, I said, what do you think I should be doing? And he said, just exploring, man, just exploring.
Yeah.
And I went away and I realized, and I know this sounds really cliched, but the exploration is the journey. And every now and then it yields something, and that's good. But you just keep exploring.
That's a narrative. You keep that machine going, and once in a while you hit that nugget. That narrative comes. It's sometimes like you will read one sentence is like better than reading a book.
Yeah.
Right? You see that sometimes, like you notice that, like I do. So.
You said this earlier on. You said, "Oh, I don't read the books. I read bits and pieces." I'm like surrounded by books. What I do with the book is I read the contents.
Yeah.
I read the index and I look at the graphics.
Yeah. Same here. Like yeah.
And if somebody says to me, "Oh, did you read that bit?" I'll just pull it down and I'll read that bit. I'll put it back up.
Yeah, there was a book, Dare to Compete. The gist of the book. I always say like the gist of the book. Like I said, gist is this, like one sentence. Summary of the book is one sentence. It's like embrace the suck. Actually, page something 21 or something like that. It says like there's one like section that embrace the suck means like that the author says that Dare to Lead in that whole book is like, don't worry about your vulnerabilities. Like don't put yourself out there. You will suck at things in the beginning. As you do more and more and more, mulling over ideas, mulling over, like if you're writing code, whatever you're doing, you're drawing, you're painting, whatever you're doing, right? Whatever your art is, keep doing it. You will get better. And another, so it was the gist of the book was like, embrace the suck. You will suck at things. And another good sort of simple narrative to latch on in that context was from John Furrier of the Cube guys, right? He says we are tech athletes, and I was like, wow, I was taken away with that, because it was like, athletes, they get up in the morning and they do push-ups or whatever. If they're playing basketball, they shoot certain number of baskets every day, and more you do, better you become, right? So practice your don't be afraid of showing your vulnerability. Thank you for your time.
Thank you too.
And we'll make it formal, and we'll continue this discussion after we stop the recording. It was a great discussion. I enjoyed it. All right, thank you. I can stop the recording.